There was once a valley cradled between quiet hills where the air always carried the scent of rice and cedar. The people there had lived by the rhythm of the clouds for generations. They planted when the wind softened, harvested when the mist lifted, and bowed in gratitude after every rainfall. Among them lived Riku, a humble farmer known not for his wealth or strength, but for his calm spirit. He was a man who woke before dawn, tying his straw sandals as the first light touched the fields. That year, however, the skies grew indifferent. The spring clouds dissolved before they reached the valley. The earth cracked, and the pond behind Riku's home shrank into a shallow mirror of dust. Each morning, he stood at the edge of his land and gazed upward, hoping to see the gray promise of rain. It never came. Yet, Riku did not curse the heavens, as many did. He simply picked up his hoe and continued to till the soil. He knew that seeds must still meet the earth, even when the sky turns away. While others delayed planting, waiting for better omens, Riku planted anyway. His neighbors called him foolish. They said, "Effort without reward is wasted." But Riku believed that the field, like the heart, remembers diligence. One day it would answer. Until then, his duty was only to tend it. Days became weeks. The sun painted the hills gold but offered no mercy. Children played in the riverbed that now lay bare, their laughter echoing in a place once filled with water. Villagers gathered in the square to complain, to predict famine, to assign blame to spirits or government. Riku stayed silent. Each evening he carried 2 heavy buckets from the last remaining well, watering his crops row by row. The sound of water touching dry soil was like a prayer whispered into a stubborn world. He understood something few did. To endure is not to wait helplessly. It is to act with grace despite uncertainty. This was his quiet practice of gaman, perseverance without complaint. He wore it like armor, invisible but strong. The weight of his labor was not a burden, it was a vow. At night, he would sit by the lantern and watch his wife mend an old kimono. She would look at him and ask if he was tired. Riku would smile. "The land is only sleeping," he would say. "It tests our patience to see if we still believe in it." The moon reflected faintly on the fields that shimmered with stubborn hope. The seedlings looked frail, but they stood. So did he. Every movement of his hands was deliberate, respectful, almost ritualistic. Even without rain, he treated the earth with the reverence one shows to a teacher who is stern but wise. He bowed before each day, honoring both struggle and stillness. By the time midsummer arrived, the fields appeared lifeless to the impatient, but beneath the surface, the seeds had begun their unseen work, absorbing every drop Riku gave, reaching slowly toward what they trusted would come. The village grew restless. He grew rooted. Riku did not measure time by harvests anymore. He measured it by discipline. To him, the lack of rain was not punishment, but invitation, a test of inner climate. Every day, he reminded himself that no drought can touch a mind anchored in purpose. So he worked under the same silent sky in faith that patience itself is a kind of rainfall. And though the valley remained parched, there was a strange beauty in it. The shimmer of heat above the fields, the scent of dry grass carried by the wind, the low hum of life refusing to surrender. In that still landscape, Riku found peace, for he knew that one who learns to serve without reward never truly suffers from lack. He waited, but not passively. He endured, but not with bitterness. He simply lived his discipline, one patient act at a time. The world around him begged for miracles. He understood that patience itself is the oldest miracle of all. The drought stretched on and the valley grew restless. Each sunrise arrived with a glare so white it silenced the birds. The air shimmered like liquid glass. Crops withered before ripening, wells shrank to mirrors of mud, and still the clouds refused to gather. By midsummer, the fields that once whispered in green now stood mute and brittle. The villagers grew weary of waiting. Their patience, stretched thin, began to snap. Some muttered that the gods had turned away. Others quarreled, blaming one another for angering the heavens. But Riku's heart did not waver. He still rose before dawn, bowed to the sky, and walked to his field. There, amid the hollow wind, he worked as if the rain were already on its way. He practiced gaman, the quiet endurance that carries dignity through hardship. He did not speak of suffering, though the cracks in his hands deepened each day. He did not ask when relief would come. He simply acted as though perseverance itself were a form of nourishment. When others groaned, he listened. When they despaired, he smiled gently, neither agreeing nor resisting. To him, complaint was a fire that consumed strength. Silence, however, was water, invisible, cooling, necessary. One afternoon, as he carried his buckets, a younger farmer stopped him. "Why do you work?" he asked. "Can you not see the earth is dead?" Riku set down the pails and looked at the soil. "The earth is never dead," he replied. "It only waits for our belief to return." His tone was calm, not defensive. There was a stillness in him that unsettled those who watched. It was not ignorance, it was something else. Nintai, patience that breathes quietly even when nothing moves. The younger man shook his head and walked away, muttering that Riku was a fool. Riku simply resumed his path, the rhythm of his steps matching the sound of sloshing water. The rhythm became a kind of meditation, steady and complete. Every motion of his day was deliberate. He carried himself with respect, not only toward others, but toward the work itself. When he entered his field, he bowed. When he lifted his tools, he did so gently, mindful of the balance between effort and care. To him, Rei was not ceremony, but awareness, the thread that connects the doer to the done. Even in drought, he refused to treat the land harshly. It had given him life once. He would not repay it with anger. The villagers often stared at him as they passed. His calm seemed unnatural. Yet in the evenings when tempers flared and despair filled their homes, Riku's heart remained clear. He carried within him Hegyoshin, the ordinary steady mind. It was not apathy, it was balance. He did not suppress emotion, nor did he cling to it. His calmness was active, a discipline born of attention. He would sometimes pause at the edge of his field, resting his hands on his hoe, gazing at the motionless sky. The air was so still it seemed even time had stopped. Yet within that stillness, he sensed something sacred. Seijaku, the deep tranquility that hides within adversity. In that silence, he could hear the faint pulse of life continuing beneath the soil, invisible but certain. He realized then that drought was not only a trial of the earth, but of spirit. Most people pray for storms that change the sky. Few learn to quiet the storm within. Riku chose the second path. When the wind blew dust across his face, he did not flinch. When his throat ached for thirst, he drank sparingly and smiled. When his wife asked him if he feared ruin, he answered, fear grows when we forget that seasons change. And so he endured, not as a victim of fate, but as its silent witness. The stormless sky did not frighten him anymore. It taught him something no teacher ever had, that calmness, once cultivated, can outlast even despair. Each night, as he closed his eyes, the sound of dry leaves rustling became a lullaby. He slept peacefully, knowing that while the world waited for clouds, he had already found his rain. It fell quietly inside him, drop by drop, in the form of patience, respect, and unyielding calm. Morning came as a pale shimmer, soft as breath. The air was cool only for a moment before the heat began to rise again, shimmering above the brown fields. Riku woke before the rooster's call, the way he always did. He stood in the doorway of his wooden house, facing east, hands together in silent acknowledgement of another day. The drought had not broken, but the ritual remained unchanged. He remembered what his old neighbor, a retired samurai named Itsuro, once told him: "To bow before what you cannot control is the first step toward mastery." Those words had stayed in his heart long after Itsuro had passed. The old man had lived by Rei, the virtue of respect that shapes every action, every breath. Itsuro taught Riku that one bows not only to teachers or elders, but also to the sky, the soil, and even to hardship itself. Respect makes the unbearable bearable. So Riku bowed each morning, not as superstition, but as conversation. He bowed to the sky that withheld its rain, to the cracked earth beneath his feet, and to the work awaiting him. This small act grounded him. It reminded him that gratitude and humility are two seeds from which endurance grows. Each bow was a dialogue between man and nature, between acceptance and effort. There was no demand, no prayer for reward, only acknowledgement. I am here, I will work again today. In that silent greeting lay Bushido, the spirit of devotion and discipline that asks for nothing but integrity. The samurai had found honor in their sword. Riku found his in the hoe he carried over his shoulder. As the day unfolded, his movements followed a rhythm that echoed Johakyu, the natural flow of all life. A beginning, a pause, and acceleration. The start of his labor was slow and thoughtful. He tested the soil, felt the texture, adjusted his posture. Midday came with intensity, the heat pressing down like weight, his body moving faster, driven by a quiet urgency. By late afternoon, his pace softened again. His breathing matched to the low hum of cicadas. Through repetition, his work became music, one that required no listener, no applause. The drought had made every task harder, but also cleaner, simpler. Each gesture held intention. He had no energy for wasted motion, no time for complaint. His hands and his heart moved as one. This was Takumi, craftsmanship not of tools or art, but of living itself. He tended his field as a craftsman tends his creation, shaping something unseen inside himself with every careful act. When villagers passed and saw him bow to the sky, they laughed. Some whispered that he had lost reason, that his faith was misplaced. Yet Riku's mind remained undisturbed. Heijishin, the ordinary, steady mind, anchored him. He believed that to stay calm when others lose composure is its own quiet form of courage. Sometimes, when the sun dipped low, he would stop and rest, gazing at the fading light. In the distance, the mountains were wrapped in a thin blue haze. The silence between wind gusts was deep enough to hold thought itself. That stillness was Seijaku, the sacred calm hidden beneath the surface of every storm. Riku had come to understand that this calm did not wait for perfect conditions. It was born from discipline, not circumstance. He noticed the smallest details, how a single stalk still held green at its base, how a bird carried a twig to build its nest even under a burning sky. These moments whispered a truth. Nature never complains, it simply continues. He realized his bow each morning mirrored that same obedience to existence. When twilight arrived, Riku wiped the dust from his hands and bowed again, this time to the setting sun. He whispered softly to himself, "Thank you for the day." The words carried no hope for rain, no bargain with fate. Gratitude had become his form of strength. He returned home quietly. His wife watched him from the doorway, her face half in shadow. She asked, "Still no clouds?" He smiled, his eyes calm. "No clouds yet. But the sky listens more closely when we greet it with respect." And as he walked inside, she noticed something curious. Although his clothes were worn and his hands cracked, his presence filled the house with an inexplicable peace. As if by bowing to the sky, Riku had somehow learned to command it. The summer deepened, and the drought became an unspoken fact of life. Each morning began with the same pale light, the same restless wind crossing the empty fields. Yet for Riku, the sameness was not a burden. It was the rhythm of discipline. He rose at the same hour, followed the same path to his field, and began his work in silence. His steps made no sound on the dry soil. His breathing was the only music that filled the dawn. What others saw as monotony, he felt as movement. There was Jo-ha-kyu in his every action, the ancient rhythm of all living things. Jo, the beginning, was slow, almost ceremonial. He started the day with mindful intention, aligning his body and his thoughts. Ha, the breaking, came when the sun rose high, and his body surrendered to the strain, each motion cutting through exhaustion like a blade through air. Q, the quickening, arrived when fatigue turned to flow, when his hands moved on their own, no longer controlled by will, but by harmony. He had learned that even in drought, there is a rhythm to effort. Those who rush break their spirit. Those who pause find strength that renews itself. Each swing of his hoe was measured, deliberate, an act of both labor and meditation. Through the repetition of his movements, he entered Seijaku, the stillness that exists within motion. The more he worked, the quieter his mind became. He could feel his heartbeat slow, his thoughts settle like dust in sunlight. The villagers passed him often, some shaking their heads. "You waste your energy," they would say. "There will be no harvest this year." He would smile, but not answer. Words, he knew, were like sparks. The more one strikes them, the faster they burn away one's calm. His silence was not defiance, but practice. To him, each moment of restraint was a form of polishing his spirit. Riku's work was a conversation with time. Every swing, every bucket of water carried meaning. He was shaping not just soil, but himself. The drought was not an obstacle, but a teacher. It taught Nintai the art of quiet perseverance. He understood that to build strength, one must hold still beneath discomfort, neither fleeing nor resisting. In that stillness, endurance became something gentle, like breath. He remembered his late father's words, "The earth does not rush, and yet it always yields." That memory guided him. While others chased quick results, Riku chose constancy. He had no schedule for progress, no obsession with outcome. His satisfaction lay in effort itself. This was Takumi, the spirit of the craftsman, finding devotion in perfecting the ordinary. Every motion of his day was a stroke of art, invisible to the world but sacred to his heart. By mid-afternoon, sweat darkened his clothes. The heat rose in waves that blurred the line between earth and sky. Yet even as his body tired, his movements did not falter. His hands continued with grace, neither hurried nor hesitant. There was discipline even in his exhaustion and beauty in his fatigue. When he stopped for water, he looked at the horizon. The fields shimmered like copper under the sun. He thought of the villagers who had given up. Some had left for distant towns, others stayed but spent their days lamenting. They believed work without result was futile. Riku saw it differently. If effort must be measured by outcome, then the heart would never grow, he whispered to himself. Evening arrived slowly, the air thick with heat and dust. He wiped his brow, cleaned his tools, and bowed once more to the sky. The light softened, turning the fields gold. In that glow, his fatigue felt holy. He realized that discipline was not punishment. It was the gentle order that gives meaning to life. He walked home as the first stars appeared. The village was quiet now, heavy with sleep and surrender. But Riku felt alive. His mind was steady, his spirit unbroken. As he crossed the narrow bridge to his house, he thought, "The world tests us to see if our rhythm will falter. Mine will not." And beneath the endless, stormless sky, the rhythm of his effort continued. Soft, patient, unwavering, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Autumn crept into the valley without rain, carrying with it a strange stillness. The nights grew cooler, the mornings wrapped in faint mist, and the fields, though barren, gleamed with a quiet gold under the weakening sun. The villagers had stopped tending their crops by now. Most spent their days repairing roofs, conserving food, and speaking of winter. Yet Riku still walked to his field each morning. To many, his persistence had turned into legend, a stubbornness they could not understand. Children whispered that he spoke to the earth. Others said the gods must pity him. But Riku never sought pity, nor did he seek approval. His reason was simple, as he once told his young son, "A warrior does not sharpen his sword only for battle. He sharpens it because the act itself makes him stronger." This was the essence of Bushido, the way of inner honor. To live with principle even when no one is watching. To act not for praise but for the cultivation of the spirit. In his heart, the hoe he carried was no different from a samurai's blade. His field a battlefield where patience met uncertainty. Each strike of the tool, each seed he buried in the dry soil was an act of quiet discipline. His son, Kenji, had begun to help him. At first, he did so reluctantly. "Why do we plant what will not grow?" he asked one morning, his voice thin from heat and doubt. Riku paused, resting his hands on the wooden handle of his hoe. The boy's eyes were sharp, searching for reason. "Because," Riku said softly, "a seed teaches us more than a harvest ever can." Kenji frowned, not understanding. "But father, the ground is too hard. Nothing will come from this." Riku smiled. "Then let us see what happens when something soft persists." He placed a seed in the boy's palm, small, light, almost weightless, and together they pressed it into the soil. "This," Riku continued, "is both sword and prayer. Every act of discipline cuts through fear and doubt. Every repetition strengthens what is unseen. The earth may resist, but our duty is to continue." The boy watched as his father worked with unhurried rhythm. His movements were graceful despite fatigue, almost like a ceremony. Riku's posture remained steady, his breath even. This was Heijoshin, the ordinary, balanced mind. the quiet that holds steady in all conditions. In his composure, Kenji sensed strength unlike anything loud or forceful. Days passed, and still the sky remained clear. Kenji began to imitate his father's movements, at first awkwardly, then with growing care. He learned to find patience in each repetition, to see meaning in the invisible. Slowly, the act of tending the soil became less about crops and more about character. One evening, as the two walked home, Kenji asked, "Do you think the rain will come soon?" Riku looked up. The sky was streaked with faint orange, endless and still. He said, "Perhaps, perhaps not. But when it does, it should find us working." The boy smiled for the first time in weeks. There was pride in his father's calmness, not arrogance, but certainty born from endurance. As days turned into weeks, Riku's field became a place of ritual more than harvest. He moved through his tasks with a craftsman's grace, embodying takumi, the devotion to perfecting even the smallest motion. His discipline was his craft, his patience a form of artistry. Whether the seeds would sprout or not no longer concerned him. The act itself was complete. In time, Kenji began to sense that the practice had changed his father. The same drought that had broken others had refined Riku, polishing his spirit until it shone with quiet purpose. There was peace in his gaze, a gentleness that carried weight. One night, as the crickets sang in the dry fields, Kenji whispered to his mother, "Father works as if the rain already came." She smiled, her hands folded in her lap. She said, "Perhaps it has. Just not the kind that falls from the sky." Outside, Riku continued to tend the field beneath the stars, his motions steady, his breath slow. He no longer looked upward for answers. The rain he sought had already begun to fall within him, drop by drop, in the form of patience, respect, and unbreakable discipline. The wind had begun to shift. It carried a cooler edge now, and in the early mornings, mist gathered in pale ribbons above the empty paddies. The drought had dulled the valley, yet a strange calm had settled over it too, like a blanket drawn across a restless child. It was as if the land itself had surrendered to stillness. Riku worked within that quiet as if it were sacred. He had stopped counting days long ago. Time had become the rhythm of his labor, the swing of his hoe, the weight of the bucket, the bow at the beginning and end of each task. He had become less a man who worked the earth and more a craftsman who shaped silence. Each motion held takumi, the devotion of mastery. Riku no longer sought harvest, he sought precision. The drought had stripped away everything unnecessary, leaving only the essence of his work. He measured the angle of every furrow, corrected the weight of his step, adjusted the flow of water from his bucket until each act felt effortless. It was not perfection he chased, but harmony, the balance between control and surrender. Villagers would sometimes stop to watch him. They could not understand the serenity with which he moved, the grace in such futility. One of them once asked, "Do you not tire of working a dead field?" Riku looked up, wiped his brow, and answered quietly, "A craftsman never works for results. He works to keep his hands honest." In those words lived his philosophy. He practiced Bushido not as battle, but as devotion, the warrior's way transposed into the field. His tools were his sword, his posture his discipline, his patience his honor. To live with such integrity, he thought, is to become your own teacher. The world around him changed little. The soil remained dry, the air still. Yet within Riku, seasons turned unseen. His attention deepened. His movements slowed into meditation. What began as repetition had evolved into a kind of prayer. This was Jo Hakyu unfolding, the rhythm of beginnings, breaks, and endings. He no longer forced effort. He let it breathe. When fatigue visited, he met it with gamin, endurance without complaint. When doubt arose, he answered it with nintai, patience steady as stone. When his back ached and his tool splintered, he paused only to repair them with care, speaking to them softly as if they too felt the drought's burden. At night, as others prayed for change, Riku prayed only for constancy, the strength to continue without resentment. That constancy became his art. His mind no longer rose and fell with circumstances. It held the quiet equilibrium of Heijoshin. The calm he carried was no longer effort, it was identity. He began to see his field differently. The cracks in the soil resembled veins on aged hands, beautiful in their endurance. The dust that settled on his skin shimmered faintly in the light, as though the land itself had marked him. Each day that he returned, he felt less separate from the earth and more a part of its unfinished story. Sometimes, during the cool hours before dawn, he would rest his hands on the handle of his hoe and close his eyes. The faint rustle of dry stalks sounded like distant waves. In that hush, he found seijaku, the profound stillness that is not empty, but full of life too subtle to see. His wife noticed the change. He spoke less, but his silence was no longer heavy. It carried peace. When she asked him if he ever missed the rains, he said, "The rain comes for those who serve the dry season faithfully." And in that truth lay the essence of Takumi. The craftsman's path is not about mastering his craft. It is about letting the craft master him. By late autumn, Riku's hands had hardened, but his eyes had softened. The drought had taken much, but it had given him something greater, clarity. He now understood that mastery is not measured by what the world gives back, but by what you continue to give when it doesn't. When he looked upon his field at dusk, he no longer saw failure. He saw form, the delicate pattern of effort shaping patience, of respect shaping purpose. The land had become a mirror, reflecting the quiet perfection of one man who learned to keep creating beauty even when the world refused to reward it. Winter descended slowly, and the valley began to sleep. The wind lost its warmth and carried with it the scent of cedar smoke and damp earth. The hills, once bright with gold, turned gray beneath the morning fog. The people no longer spoke of crops, they spoke of survival. Yet Riku's routine did not falter. Each morning, he walked through the frost that crackled beneath his feet and greeted his fields as he had done for months. The earth was brittle now, but he touched it with the same reverence. His breath rose in thin white clouds, dissolving into the pale air. Though the season had changed, his rhythm remained unchanged, his steps steady, his gaze soft, his heart still. This was Heijoshin in its purest form, the ordinary mind unmoved by extremes. Riku had learned that calmness is not born from comfort, but from trust in the cycle of all things. He had watched people surrender to despair when the rain did not come, and now he watched them grow restless again as the cold deepened. They chased the weather as they chased happiness, never realizing that both move beyond human command. One evening, a traveler passed through the village seeking shelter. He was a young man, his clothes torn by wind and time. Hearing of Riku's strange patience, he came to see him. When he arrived, he found the farmer kneeling beside a patch of frozen soil, breaking it gently with his fingers as if it were fragile glass. "Old man," the traveler said, "why do you work land that refuses to feed you?" Riku looked up, his hands still in the soil. "Because the earth does not owe me harvest," he said quietly. "It owes me nothing. Yet still I must answer its silence with my steadiness." The traveler frowned. "But what do you gain from this?" Riku smiled faintly. "Peace," he said. "A peace that does not depend on rain." The traveler watched him work in silence for a while. There was a rhythm in Riku's movements, a slowness that seemed to defy time. Each breath was even, each gesture deliberate. It was the same quiet strength that exists in mountains, the power of stillness. This was Gamen again, endurance without bitterness. It was the unyielding grace that continues long after reason suggests surrender. At night, when the world fell into darkness, Riku sat near his door and listened to the distant wind. His wife often joined him, bringing tea warmed over the fire. They rarely spoke. The silence between them had grown comfortable, even sacred. In that quiet space lived Seijaku, tranquility, not born from absence of noise, but from acceptance of it. He watched the stars shimmer faintly, scattered like seeds across the sky. He thought of his son now helping at the field each day, his young hands learning patience through repetition. Discipline, Riku once told him, is like tending a fire. If you feed it too fiercely, it burns out. If you neglect it, it dies. You must learn to keep it steady. Kenji had nodded but did not yet understand. He wanted action, results, certainty. But the lessons of nintai, slow patience, cannot be learned through urgency. They must be lived through quiet endurance. There were nights when even Riku felt the weight of stillness pressing against him. There were moments when doubt whispered that his faith was foolish. Yet he never argued with that voice. He only bowed to it. "Thank you for visiting," he would say inwardly, "but I am not finished yet." The strength he carried was not loud. It did not conquer. It did not shine. It simply endured. And in that endurance lay freedom. The freedom from needing outcomes to justify action. As snow began to fall, the valley changed once more. The white flakes landed softly on the dead stalks of rice, covering the dry cracks of earth. The villagers saw it as a reminder of failure. Riku saw it as a promise. Even the hardest ground receives grace eventually. He pressed his palms together, bowing before the sky one more time. The cold air stung his lungs, but his heart remained warm, still, unshaken. It was then he understood what his years of labor had been preparing him for. Not the harvest of grain, but the harvest of spirit. The drought had not tested his strength, it had revealed it. His was the unmoving heart, the still water beneath all storms. And though the rain had not yet come, Riku knew it would. It always does. For those who learn to wait without resentment and to work without demand. The first raindrop fell so quietly that Riku almost mistook it for imagination. It landed on the rim of his bucket, rolled down its side, and disappeared into the earth. Then came another and another. The rhythm was slow at first, like the hesitant tapping of fingers on wood, but soon the entire valley exhaled. Rain. It began as a whisper and grew into song. Sheets of silver poured from the heavens, striking the thirsty ground with joy so fierce it almost hurt. The smell of wet soil rose, rich and alive, carrying the scent of forgiveness. The villagers ran outside, shouting, laughing, raising their hands to the sky as if to catch the blessing before it fled. Children danced barefoot in the mud, their laughter echoing against the mountains. But Riku did not rush out. He stood at the doorway of his home for a long while, watching the rain fall. His wife looked at him, puzzled. "Aren't you going to the field?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "The earth already knows I am grateful." When he finally stepped outside, the rain kissed his face and soaked his clothes within moments. He walked to his field slowly, each footstep sinking softly into the mud. The soil, once cracked and lifeless, now drank deeply, sighing as if waking from a long dream. The seedlings he had tended, dry and brittle for months, began to stir. It was as though they had been waiting all along, not for rain, but for faith. Riku closed his eyes and lifted his face toward the sky. The droplets traced paths down his cheeks, mingling with tears he hadn't realized were there. He didn't weep from joy alone, but from the sheer humbling truth of it all, that the moment he had prepared for had come, not through control, but through surrender. This was Seijaku fulfilled, tranquility that remains unbroken through change. The stillness he had cultivated through drought did not vanish now that life returned. It deepened. He could feel it inside him, a calm stronger than any storm. He walked through his field slowly, running his hands over the sprouting green. "You waited well," he whispered. "You never gave up." His words were not just for the plants, but for himself, for his family, for the quiet discipline that had carried them through the drought. The villagers came to him later, their eyes bright with renewed hope. Some apologized for doubting him, others asked what had kept him so patient when they had nearly given up. Riku simply said, "You cannot rush what moves by its own rhythm. The rain does not come because we demand it. It comes when the sky is ready." They nodded, though few understood. True patience, he knew, cannot be explained, it must be lived. That evening, as rain continued to fall, he sat outside beneath the eaves, watching droplets ripple across the puddles. The entire world seemed to glisten. He thought of Jo-ha-kyu, the rhythm of life he had followed all year, the slow beginning, the breaking point, and the sudden release. The drought had been Jo, the long unfolding of struggle. The stillness had been Ha, the testing of faith, and now Kyu, the quickening, had arrived with the storm. But even as abundance returned, Riku did not celebrate wildly. Joy to him was not noise, it was stillness, felt deeply within the heart. The rain did not feel like victory, it felt like reunion. That night, he stood in his doorway, looking over the darkened fields shimmering with rain. For the first time in months, he could hear the song of frogs rising from the water, the soft rhythm of renewal. His wife joined him, resting her head against his shoulder. "Does it feel like all your work was worth it?" she asked. He thought for a moment before answering. It was always worth it, even when the rain refused. The storm continued through the night, gentle but endless. As he listened, Riku realized something profound. The drought had not been an absence, but a teacher. It had taught him Gammon, to endure with dignity, Nintai, to persist without demand, Rei, to bow before what cannot be controlled, Bushido, to act with integrity regardless of outcome, Heijishin, to stay balanced in all things, Takumi, to perfect the art of patience, Jo-ha-kyu, to move with the natural tempo of life, and Seijaku, to find stillness beneath both drought and rain. When morning came, the storm had passed. The world smelled of renewal. Riku stepped into his field once more, his sandals sinking into the soft, forgiving earth. The sky was clear again, blue and vast, as though nothing had ever been wrong. He bowed deeply toward it, his lips forming silent words. Thank you for the waiting. For the rest of his life, Riku never complained about the weather again. He had learned that rain and drought are not opposites. They are partners in teaching the heart how to stay unmoved. And as he worked that morning, the sound of his hoe striking wet soil carried a rhythm both familiar and eternal. The drought had broken, but its lessons remained, echoing through every drop that fell, every breath he took, and every silent bow toward the sky that had taught him patience without promise, faith without proof, and peace without condition. In the weeks that followed, the valley transformed. The fields turned emerald once again, their reflections shimmering in the morning light like glass. The streams that had lain silent now murmured softly, weaving through stones polished by the storm. The villagers worked from dawn till dusk, their laughter returning to the air like birds long absent. Life had resumed its rhythm, but for Riku, something fundamental had changed. He realized that the rain was never the true reward. What had altered him was the drought itself. Months of uncertainty had stripped away illusion, revealing the deeper structure of strength. He had learned that patience is not waiting for external change. It is the mastery of internal climate. The calm he carried now did not depend on the sky. It came from within, steady and self-sustaining. Modern understanding would name this resilience, but in the old language of the heart, it was Gammon and Nintai. Science tells us that when we endure hardship without resistance, our brain rewires itself. Neural pathways that once flared with anxiety begin to calm. The mind learns to regulate stress. The body learns to rest, even under tension. Patience in this way becomes not just virtue, but physiology. Riku's discipline had trained more than his muscles. It had trained his nervous system. His steady breathing, his measured rhythm, his silence under strain, these were meditations in motion. They had activated what modern medicine calls the parasympathetic response, the body's natural state of balance. His Heijiotion, the calm, ordinary mind, was not mystical. It was biological harmony. His bow to the sky each morning was also a psychological act of rei, respect as alignment. It grounded him, transformed uncertainty into ritual. In neuroscience, ritual reduces cognitive chaos. It replaces randomness with structure. For Riku, that structure became faith. The bow was his way of saying to the unknown, I will meet you with order, even when you give me none. His way of work, too, reflected what psychology now calls flow. Each repetition of motion, tilling, watering, adjusting, pausing, led him into Takumi, the craftsman state, where attention narrows and time disappears. In this state, the prefrontal cortex quiets, and the mind merges with action. Riku had lived what scientists now describe as neural synchrony, the unity of thought and deed. What others called monotony, he experienced as transcendence. Even his rhythm of effort, following Jo-Ha-Kyu, mirrored nature's mathematical precision. All living systems, heartbeat, breath, waves, move through that same arc, slow rise, acceleration, and release. By aligning with it, Riku had tuned himself to the natural tempo of life itself. This synchronization between body and nature had dissolved stress, creating what the ancients called seijaku, stillness within motion, silence beneath sound. When Kenji, his son, asked him one evening what he had learned from the drought, Riku smiled and said, "To serve the day without demand." It was a simple answer, yet it held the essence of all his understanding. He explained further, "Discipline is not a prison, it is freedom from the chaos of our moods. When you rise and act, even when nothing seems to change, you prove to yourself that peace is not fragile. It is trained, built, and strengthened like a muscle." He placed his calloused hand on Kenji's shoulder and he said, "Patience, respect, rhythm, and stillness are not separate virtues. They are 4 doors that open into the same room, faith without expectation. In that room, there is no need to rush, no need to complain, no need to fear, because once you learn to hold calm through uncertainty, the world loses its power to shake you." Modern psychology calls this equanimity, the ability to remain centered regardless of external conditions. Studies show that people who practice mindful endurance recover faster from setbacks, adapt more easily to change, and sustain motivation longer. Riku, without knowing it, had lived the science of resilience. His story reminds us that every drought, visible or unseen, is an invitation to practice this balance. Life's dry seasons are not punishments, but apprenticeships. They teach us to master response over reaction, to build integrity in silence, and to keep walking even when the path gives no promise of reward. The moral is not grand, but essential. Work with respect, wait with patience, act with steadiness, and rest within stillness. You cannot control when the rain arrives, but you can control the grace with which you endure its absence. And when that rain finally comes, whatever it may be, it will not find you desperate or broken. It will find you prepared, whole, and at peace. For the sky changes, but the disciplined heart does not. So let this be remembered. Those who wait without complaining are not passive. They are the silent architects of their own strength. The drought ends for everyone eventually, but for those like Riku, it ends first within.